In this video, I'll be sewing the McCall's M6044 pattern. It's a men's shirt, and I'll be making this view for my dad as a birthday present. I made this shirt about a year ago, and this was the muslin I made then. I ended up making it out of a beautiful Oxford cotton from Core Fabrics. There was one fit issue in this one to do with the side seams that I was able to fix for this one. The fabric I chose, I bought it in New York City. Gorgeous gray and black check, 100% cotton. I start always by ironing the fabric out and then lying it flat. I have already traced the pattern pieces onto Swedish tracing paper, and then I can lay them out on the fabric. Because I'm doing single layer of fabric, I had to leave room to flip the pattern pieces. When you're flipping a piece on the fold, I always trace it first. And I found that this chalk worked way better than my Clover chalk liner. But yeah, always trace it because it's so easy to forget that it's on the fold and snip it right through the middle. Pinning and cutting the other pieces. To mark the pleats and the sleeves, I decided to use this Clover chalk paper, and it somewhat worked, but I thought that actually just using the pin method with chalk showed up better. And those are all the pieces. Next step is interfacing. I have a lot of sewing interfacing, which I prefer because I find it doesn't bubble and it just gives a really nice finish even after you wash the piece. I was lazy, however, in this video. If you've seen my other videos, you know I always baste them in by hand. I decided to use glue in this case. Now stay tuned to see how that turned out and why I maybe wouldn't recommend it. You'll see. And these are all my pieces interfaced. You can just trim off anything that overhangs the main fabric. And then trim the corners of the interfacing, just the interfacing, off of your cuff and collar pieces. I always forget to do that. Now I'm just selecting my Gutermann thread and an 80 size needle. So first official step is preparing the pocket. Now I actually changed the pocket size to fit the iPhone that my dad has. Such an easy alteration to make, but it can make the garment so much more useful for whoever will be wearing it. Okay, and so you just fold over, stitch those sides, cut them, and turn them right side out. Pretty good. Then you finish folding in the rest of the seam allowances. And here's the problem I ran into with the glue. As I was ironing, I got all these splotches over the fabric and I got really worried. I guess that's just the glue bleeding through, and also it got my iron kind of dirty. So stay tuned to the end to see what happens if these glue marks do wash out. Anyway, so here is my pocket. It's camouflaged pretty well. I was able to line up those stripes pretty nicely. And then you just top stitch. If you want a really clean and perfect placement, I would recommend basting, but I didn't do that. And it shifted a little bit, but overall I think it's pretty good. Next up, shoulder seams. And I wanted to take a minute to tell you how I do the seams for button-up shirts. So you start just right sides together like normal. So with your normal seam allowance. Then trim one of the sides, press that, and then flip it over and press from the right side. That's a super important step. Don't forget that one. Next, go back to the wrong side and you're gonna fold the longer seam allowance over the smaller one. So you're gonna encase the smaller one in it. It ends up being about 3/8 of an inch. Next up, this is not technically necessary, but I tried making a shirt without doing this, and it's totally worth it. You take out your hand sewing supplies. So here I'm just grabbing a needle and I'm threading it. Use the same color thread, because then if you can't get all of the basting thread out, it doesn't really matter. Okay, ready to baste. And you're just gonna hand baste this seam, the folded seam allowances down. This makes it so that you can top stitch it from the right side of the garment, which I always find gives a better finish, and you don't have to worry about it coming undone or your pins kind of pushing it while you're sewing. And then super easy, just pull the basting thread out like this. So awesome. And then of course press. So that's what I do for all the seams. I don't always show it, but just know that that's what's happening. Next up, sewing the sleeve, and I'm going to stop at that mark there. So it's left open, and then you give a little snip right before that opening. Then press down those seam allowances and fold under again to create a little hem. And I do a little point at the top there, and then top stitch. You can add a bit of fray check where it's fraying a bit there if you're worried. Next up is attaching the sleeves, which is probably my least favorite part. I always try on the shirt first and the sleeve to make sure that the proper sleeve is going in the proper armhole. I think everyone makes this mistake at least once. Tons of pins. If you make a pleat by accident, just unpick it and repin it with so many pins like this. And if you do that, you should be okay. And now you sew in the side seams and the arm seams all in one. Since doing felled seams is very iron heavy, I actually end up using knee pads so that I can get eye level with my iron and not have my knees kill me. A word of warning, when you're doing the top stitching for the sleeve, it does get a bit hairy where you kind of have to be sewing in a tube like this. Just be careful, use your fingers when the needle is not running, and make sure you're only sewing through one layer of fabric. This mail tube is the best tack for hand sewing that felled seam down. Otherwise, it's such a pain. So get some sort of hard tube that your needle won't catch on, and you'll save so much time and headache. Next up is the cuff. So it starts pretty simple. You just fold over 5/8 of an inch, press that, trim it, and then attach it to the interfaced piece that you haven't folded over. And then when you turn it right side out and make sure to press, you'll have a beautiful cuff. Attaching the cuff to the sleeve is very straightforward. And then it says to slip stitch the folded edge down over the seam allowance, but I always just hand baste and then edge stitch, and I've had no problems with that. Beautiful, from the inside and out. Okay, next is the hem. Be very patient with this step. I used the method that they described in like the front of the pattern instructions, and it's fine. It just takes a long time. It's good if you have glass head pins that you could iron over. Okay, here are my button bands, and as I sewed them on, I really tried to line up those horizontal lines. I think I did an okay job. Next up, you're going to press. Always remember to press from that right side to make sure that it's completely flush. And then you're going to sew, this is the bottom corner. So you just want to follow where that hem line is and sew a line across the button band. And it should be perfectly nice and seamless once you turn it right side out. Beautiful. Okay, and then edge stitching. I don't have an edge stitching foot. I've heard those are really good. I feel like I've just gotten kind of used to what to watch. Okay, there is where I'm at with my shirt. Next up is the collar. So here I'm just stay stitching the neck. I put my needle on the rightmost side it can go, and then just stitched around there. This is the uninterfaced collar piece, and I always do this. I snip off a bit from each end. I think you can see I'm doing like 3/8 of an inch, Then you line up the edges with the interfaced collar piece and stretch it as you sew it. Okay, here is this point turning technique that I wanted to show, like as a little mini tutorial. So you take 2 loops, you kind of loop it over your finger twice so the 2 folded edges are on the top. Doesn't really matter, but yeah, you just want the loose ends to be on the bottom and the curved edges on the top. And it's better if you use a thicker thread for this. Okay, then I'm showing you're going to put them with the loops in the corners like that, so you'll catch them as you sew around. Now I made a crucial mistake here where I put it on the outside of the fabric like I showed in that clip. You really are supposed to sandwich it between the 2 collar pieces. So I guess I showed a good demonstration of where it goes if you had like x-ray vision, but don't do it like this way. This is the clip where I realized that I've done it wrong. I'm like, wait, I cannot pull this thread and get the point to come with it. So yeah, just a demonstration of how this should not work. What not to do. Anyway, so I just did it the normal way with the point turner, and honestly it came out fine. The other way is not a necessity, but it just is satisfying to get those super sharp points. And that collar is curving a little bit. The more you trim off in the previous step, the more it will curve, and it will curve nicely around your neck. Then you just baste that open edge shut and edge stitch around all the other edges. On the collar stand, I'm pressing up 5/8 of an inch. And then this step where you have to assemble the whole collar unit is quite confusing the first few times you do it. Just remember, try to make sure the collar stand pieces are even on each side of the collar. So if you fold it in half like that, remember that it goes collar stand, collar, collar stand, and that the uninterfaced side of the collar should be touching the interfaced collar stand piece. So yeah, hopefully that's helpful. Then when you sew that curve, you want to try and make it as tight of a curve as you can, so it's almost like a right angle. You want it to be a steep hill. Now you get to press all of that and admire your hard work. Make sure, I'm going to say it again, iron from the right side. And there's your completed collar unit. When attaching the collar unit to the shirt, make sure those edges really line up. That is crucial for a professional finish. And when you're sewing, do you see how my left hand is underneath the fabric there? That will save you so much time unpicking and getting rid of tucks and folds. I think I only had one the whole time, and it was because that hand was underneath helping smooth out the fabric. Bring in my iPad for some TVs while I hand baste. Again, same thing with the slip stitching. I just skip that and edge stitch. Now time for the fun part, choosing buttons. I found a few lighter colored ones that I liked, but I couldn't decide between the light and the black. So I put a poll on Instagram, and overwhelmingly the black one. Make sure you follow me on Instagram if you haven't. I post polls and outfit videos. Then I just mark my buttonhole placements. Just make sure it all looks good and even. And let me show you how I do a buttonhole with my machine. I think this is called an automatic buttonhole foot. So you pop it on there, and there's a little place where you can plug in that cord. Then you take your button and you bring it down to this little measuring guide at the bottom. Check how big your button is. So I would say this one is a 12. Hit the buttonhole marking and then make that number read 12. Always do a test buttonhole. This clip is sped up, but you just let the machine do all the work. You just hold down the foot until it stops. And voila. For unpicking, just go from one edge into the middle and the other edge into the middle. That way you won't accidentally rip through the whole thing. Next, I always just add fray check, which is like a glue that helps the fabric from fraying. And is it weird that I really like the smell of fray check? Let me know if anyone else agrees. Change of scenery. I watched some TV as I put all the buttons on. I like to sew them by hand. Make sure while you're sewing the buttons on that the bottom hem of each side of the shirt lines up. That's so important. And there's the finished shirt. Since this is a present, I had to make sure to wrap it, so I just put it in some tissue paper and popped it into a gift bag. So for the cost breakdown, I basically owned everything already, which I'm going to count as free, and the only thing I bought new was the fabric for $21 US. Now here is the reveal finally. Here's my dad modeling his new shirt. I think this fabric and print really suits him. It's beautiful fabric. I think it fits quite well. Nice relaxed fit. There's a close-up of the details there. And in case you're wondering, the glue did wash out. Yay! If you enjoyed seeing this process, please be sure to like this video, and I'll see you in the next one.